It is Friday, August 21st. Let's talk PlayStation. As we often do here every Friday, we will start with our PlayStation Plus reminder. So the August games that are currently available, that's Fall Guys and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Campaign Remastered. You have a little under 2 weeks left to download these games or add them to your library. But let's start with our first story here. The Last of Us Part 2 has now moved up to the third best-selling PlayStation exclusive here in the US in terms of life-to-date dollar sales. Number 1 and 2 still being held by Marvel's Spider-Man and the 2018 God of War, but still very impressive that this game has come so far in just such a short amount of time. Also, a fantastic debut from Ghost of Tsushima, where it's now the fourth best US launch in PlayStation history for PlayStation exclusives. I'm just so pleased at how well this game has done. I mean, I had a lot of reservations going into it, but that was also because Sony wasn't very forthcoming with a lot of information about this game up until right near the last, 3-4 months before the game actually came out. We got that state of play. Sucker Punch finally telling us a little bit more about the game and how it plays. Overall, though, I'm just pleased to see that the game really is doing well. And in terms of Ghost of Tsushima, we got a really interesting left field announcement, which is Ghost of Tsushima Legends, which will be a co-op multiplayer experience, free update for current owners of the game coming later this fall. So it's going to be a class-based system. There's 4 classes to choose from, a lot of customization. You can go through the single-player campaign. You can go through a survival mode. There's also going to be raids after this free update does come out. But it's just something where I don't think many people really anticipated something like this. Kind of like when Uncharted or The Last of Us was announced to get a multiplayer mode, and it turned out a lot of people really enjoyed those sections of those games. And so I expect a similar experience here, where it may be something that you didn't ask for it, but once you play it, you might have a really good time with it. And it's also been confirmed that there will be no microtransactions in this mode as well. So that's always great to hear for any sort of multiplayer component in a modern video game. Also, before we move on, I thought this was just so cool to point out, but Sony ran a competition internally for their employees where the first 50 people to platinum Ghost of Tsushima actually won this beautifully engraved wooden box, this display case with a replica Supa inside of it. And that's just so awesome. I love the fact that they do this. I don't know how frequently they do actually run competitions for any trophy-related tasks, but the fact that they did it for this game I thought was just really fascinating. Moving on, this one's more of a cautionary news story than anything else, but this past week we saw Fortnite The Last Laugh bundle get announced for PS4, X1, Nintendo Switch, coming November 17th at retail. And then in the blog post announcing this, Epic mentions that this bundle will be ready in time for PS5 and Series X, and many are thinking that they've inadvertently released the release date for these consoles as November 17th. So this is just one of many examples we've seen the past few months, but also this month in particular, where we're getting more retailer listings show up, and they're guessing sometime in November. They're guessing around 500, give or take a few hundred. Very recently, we also saw Alana Pierce mention she saw a retailer listing, or an inventory listing actually, so it's in the system, for Series X as having a price tag of $599. It's important to remember that at this point in the game, especially considering what we've seen so far and the circumstance that we're in, it's very unlikely that any of these things are going to get leaked outside of the controlled nature of how Sony and Microsoft are delivering their news right now. Granted, we've had a fair amount of slip-ups so far in the build-up for these consoles, like the specs and general performance based on AMD's lineup. That was fairly accurate. We saw PS5 dev kits. We're seeing controllers pop up left and right. But, these are fixed variables. They're not easily changed. But something like price and release date, considering that we are in August and we still don't have final numbers, well, what does that tell you? That these are subject to change. That is one of the few areas where the manufacturer has some slight steer, when they decide when they're going to release it, how they're going to price it. But I've also cautioned many times that this might not be very exciting to a lot of you once these numbers actually do come out, because inherently they do have price targets. There's not this wide range that we're really working with here. Probably around 500, probably around November. There is this standoff in terms of trying to get your messaging out correctly, or trying to take some heat if you are slightly more expensive than the other one, but for the most part, this might not be all that exciting. But at least for now, this is why very unlikely that we'll see any of these numbers leak prior, because only Sony and Microsoft really know what they're shooting for, which it's not final. Moving on to our next news story, Deathloop, the PlayStation 5 console timed exclusive, has been officially delayed to the second quarter of 2021. This is unfortunately another victim of COVID, so the developer has a work from home order. They're prioritizing the safety of the team, and that general workflow has really slowed the progress of this title, and so it has been pushed back by about 5-6 months. We don't know the exact release window outside of the fact that it was supposed to release by the end of this year, so you presume it was fairly close to PS5's launch, if not a launch title, but the team obviously needs some more time to get this project out. We have been given hints that this is going to hit certain teams harder than others, and so we might see more delays, and, well, this is one of them. But while we are talking about Deathloop, we did learn how this game is going to use the DualSense's adaptive triggers. In fact, we learned how a lot of games are going to use the adaptive triggers and haptic feedback, because just yesterday, Sony finally showed us their first global ad spot for PlayStation 5. It's a little over a minute long. It's live action, heavy use of CGI, of course, but it has three key principles, and that is the 3D audio, haptic feedback, and adaptive triggers. We see a young woman with a bow and arrow going through a lot of these harsh environments. Pretty cool for the most part. Really reminds me of the PlayStation 9 commercials back in the day for PS2, if you remember that. I don't know, giving off the same vibes, which isn't really super representative of the actual console and the software, but we will see ads like that down the road that showcases actual PS5 games. And it is worth noting that this is very much a global ad spot. So remember, Sony Interactive Entertainment is now a global effort, so they're not doing marketing efforts territory by territory. They're having one campaign slogan, which is "Play has no limits," and then this commercial will air amongst all these countries, all these different territories, for one global effort to try and sell PlayStation 5. Now, alongside the reveal of this commercial, we also had a PlayStation blog write-up which details a number of games and how they actually utilize these features. And we've been given examples in the past, but not for this many titles, and certainly we haven't learned some of the things that we found out here, which is, going back to Deathloop, one thing that can happen in this game is your gun can jam up, and when that happens, you actually can't pull down the trigger, so you'll try to do that, and that's when an animation will play on screen of your character trying to fix their jammed gun. That is not one way I would have considered how this feature would actually be utilized, so that's certainly very unique. Spider-Man Miles Morales with the haptic feedback. When you go for a Venom Blast by holding down square, you'll feel a sensation from the left side of the controller slowly transfer to the right side until you launch your attack, so that's also pretty interesting. I feel like that would be a weird sensation. And then Ratchet & Clank, you've got the Enforcer weapon that's like a dual-barreled shotgun, so you can pull down the trigger and you'll fire one barrel, and you'll feel a resistance point about halfway down the trigger. If you want a bigger blast, you pull it past that resistance point and you'll fire both barrels at the same time. We're even seeing something like Demon's Souls trying to use these features and make it feel like more of a sensory experience, even for things that seem very mundane, so things like opening a gate or striking metal. They're going to try to make that feel as though it's a little bit different. Things like fire crackling, you can feel that in your hand, or as you try to conjure magic, they're going to really try and tap into the haptics there to make it more of a... Again, more of a sensory experience. All things considered, they sound great in theory, but it's going to be a different story when everybody starts playing PS5 software and realizing that they might not actually enjoy these things. We're not even being told just yet if you can turn these features off, which you would assume that you can just based off of the fact that you can turn off rumble, right? But something like the touchpad, which is an input method in certain games, require gestures or even so much as a button press from the touchpad. You can't turn that off, right? You need that. These are passive features, and so while they sound great, and there's certainly a marketing push for these features, right? You have to use a DualSense for PlayStation 5. Our first ad campaign focuses on the sensory experience of PlayStation 5. It still remains to be seen just how much it really genuinely enhances a gameplay experience. But anyway, moving on to our next news story, and coinciding with all of this, Sony's head of global marketing, Eric Lampel, was speaking with GameIndustry.biz about this recent ad spot that they put out, and a lot of interesting quotes here that we're going to pick apart, but we'll start with the company's continued insistence that PS5 will launch this year, despite the pandemic that we're currently in, that people can't hold a controller or try it themselves until they buy it. He says, "It's a massive challenge on every front, not just for the parts of the organization that I oversee, but for all parts of the organization. The nice thing is that we're pulling it together. We will launch this year, that will happen, and from my end, we will absolutely make sure that we will bring all the magic and all the excitement of launches that we've had in the past." He continues later on to say, "If the world was in a normal place, we would be out there with demo stations at different events, with the ability for consumers to touch the product and interact with it and really understand what we are talking about." It was actually revealed in this conversation that the TV spot they did put out, the actress filmed some of her parts in her house, and there were teams from all over the world to work on this, so the director was in one place, the marketing team was in another, all the animators that did the CGI were in separate locations, so of course that's one hurdle to get over. He even mentions that if they weren't in a pandemic, they certainly would have approached this first ad in a different manner. But they also touch on generations once again, how they still very much believe in your typical console generation. So Eric Lempel says, the genesis of this is that we're moving into a new generation, and to us, generations matter. It's a chance to raise the expectations from players and gamers and really introduce something new. So for this spot in particular, we focused on 3 distinct areas: the haptic feedback, the adaptive dynamic triggers, and 3D audio. We wanted to show what it would be like to be in the middle of all of that. So very much, Sony has still been pretty conservative and fairly normal in their approach to PlayStation 5, in that they want to make sure that this is a brand new console and convey that to the consumer that, hey, here are some next-gen features. Whether you like them or not, these are next-gen features that you're only going to get on PlayStation 5. Further on, they talk about the globalization efforts, how they had to figure out one particular tagline for all territories, which for this time around, it's play has no limits. Same with the ad campaign. How do you do that and make it work and localize it for all these different territories? But they also talk about the content lineup for PlayStation 5 and how launch is really going to shape up. And so for there, he says, once you get beyond all the features of PlayStation 5, which makes it a true next generation product, it's all about the content. The content that will be in the launch window and beyond is incredibly exciting. I would say that this is the best lineup that we've ever seen in the history of PlayStation. Between our worldwide studios groups and our partners from all the different publishers around the world, we revealed some of that content, and naturally there will be more to come. But the way that developers can engage with this platform and create these new experiences with known IP as well as unknown IP is incredibly exciting. This is something where I would immediately tell you, of course, Sony's going to say nice things about their own product and their launch lineup. However, we have had conversations in the past where this is a generation we're walking into that has a unique circumstance not seen in prior ones. It's not a brand new, completely exotic architecture. It's similar to PlayStation 4. Now, there's still brand new SDK features for this new generation that has a learning curve for developers, but it's not quite the same jump from PS1 to 2 or 2 to 3, certainly. You're not learning a brand new architecture from the ground up, and so there isn't this risk factor involved in trying to learn a platform, release a stable game on time on day one for a platform that has an install base of practically 0. The risk factor is much lower for developers that can comfortably ship on, say, PS4 and even PlayStation 5. And so, while we can't quite speak to the quality of the launch lineup for PS5, we can certainly argue that we might see a very large launch lineup, or one that's vast with different genres and a lot to choose from. We normally see anywhere from 15 to 30 games in a launch lineup, but it might be much more for PS5, which that by itself is already pretty good. However, what would give this the potential for being the best lineup in PlayStation history is launching with Spider-Man Miles Morales, but also the Demon's Souls remake. So this past week, what we saw is Demon's Souls get rated from the Korean ratings board for release in Japan. Games don't get rated unless they're fairly close to being released, and Spider-Man already received its rating, and that game we know has a holiday 2020 release window. You presume they're aiming for that to be day one, and Demon's Souls also got rated, but there's no release window for that game. So is it a launch window or a launch title game? This is something where I think it's just a matter of how far along these games were. So if Demon's Souls is in fact planned to be a launch title game, and they didn't tell us that at the PS5 See the Future event, it's just a matter of confidence if you'll be able to hit the release date of PlayStation 5. So if that is the case, it seems like Spider-Man was probably further along to where they could say right away, holiday 2020, expect this to be one of the first PS5 games that you'll be able to pick up. Demon's Souls might have been a little bit behind, or they just weren't necessarily sure if they were going to be able to hit the release date. It's been a good trend with publishers throughout the years where they won't release information about the game until they know that they can hit those dates that they've set internally. And of course, the pandemic has really changed things for the workflow of developers. So doesn't really confirm anything, but the fact that it's rated is pretty encouraging that we might see this game sooner rather than later. Next up, this story is a little bit old. We didn't have enough time to cover this on Let's Talk PlayStation last week, but still important to bring up here, which is Xbox head Phil Spencer was recently on the Animal Talking podcast. This is Gary Whitta's show where it takes place in Animal Crossing: New Horizons. I love this concept, but anyway, he was there. Interesting quote I'd like to share with you all where he says, "We want people to feel like they're a member of Xbox, and that membership isn't about one device. It can be multiple devices. I want to have a great experience on the television, and I think Xbox Series X is absolutely going to deliver that, and I'm incredibly excited about the lineup of games that we're building, but it is a fundamental difference than the traditional console war as people talk about. how many consoles do I sell versus how many consoles does the other company sell, Sony or Nintendo or other companies back in the day. That's not our approach. If that was our approach, we wouldn't put our games on PC, we wouldn't put our games on Xbox One, we wouldn't do xCloud and allow people to play games on their phones. Now look, I'm sorry, but is this not what I've been saying for years? I'm not even trying to stroke the ego here, but it's nice to hear Phil Spencer actually lay this out beat for beat about what I've been trying to put across here. This company is not as concerned with selling Series X as you might think. I mean, yes, they would love to move a lot of these machines, but it is truly one-sided here. Sony's going to sell a lot of PS5s, much more than Series X in all likelihood over the life cycle of these consoles, and that's why Microsoft, since like 2015, 2016, have been building Xbox as more of a brand across these devices, shipping their software everywhere and now going through services. I mean, it's obvious, right? And so it's almost been funny to see the console war play out like it normally does. I mean, that's an expectation for every new console launch, but realistically, it has not been like this hasn't been nearly as heated as what we saw with PS3 and 360, where that life cycle truly ended with nearly identical install bases, and then going into PS4 and X1. And that really was also a truly heated console war, especially with the DRM policies, and then, Sony trying to, Sony was really returning to form there. I mean, this is relatively tame compared to what we saw the last two generations, and then, the generation prior, that was one-sided with PlayStation 2. So, I mean, we've passed peak console war, and, it's still fun to discuss the business, and that's what we do here versus Sony and Microsoft and their different strategies, but this is what I've been saying. Next up, we've got a new Sony patent to go over that was recently uncovered, and this one describes a liquid metal cooling apparatus for a semiconductor device, which sounds very cool on the surface, although from what I gather, this is just describing a replacement for thermal paste. So instead of that, which is very traditional, you would have liquid metal between the CPU, GPU, and whatever heat sinks are available, or however this thing's really going to be arranged and built. We don't know, of course, just yet. We're still waiting for a proper teardown, and we'll have our answers very soon about how this thing's going to be cooled, because while we know it also has a traditional, fan that's going to be spinning to push out air, there's still some sort of other cooling mechanism in place that is potentially much more expensive than what we normally see for these boxes in terms of manufacturing. And so there's still going to be some familiarity with how this is being built, but we need to wait for Sony to tell us what this other, exotic nature of cooling really is, which this isn't super exotic. It's a method that people also use nowadays, but we'll wait and see on what actually plays out. And remember, we also had another patent for stacked chips, a heat sink that actually goes through the PCB. So there's like a bunch of things that Sony's clearly looking at that may or may not even be for PlayStation 5, right? So not much we can really say beyond that. Also, while this isn't specifically PlayStation related, I feel like I'd be remiss to not touch on this really quickly, but yesterday we saw this random indie game get announced called Black Myth Wukong, and it looks incredibly impressive for such a random announcement. This is an indie game developed by a small team of ex-Tencent employees, and it just looks gorgeous. I mean, it's 13 minutes long, very larger-than-life enemies, looks Dark Souls in some areas, but then looks like it plays like God of War in other areas. Really impressive stuff. I mean, this is like the same thing that we saw for Bright Infinite Memory, which that game is made by one person, and visually it just looks fantastic. That's how you can get away with doing so much when you're working with Unreal Engine. So this game looks incredible as well. I'd still have some concern just based off of how much they showed, and if it really feels as fluid as it looks, but a lot of people really impressed with this right away, and I wish this was more commonplace where game announcements just dropped with 13 minutes of raw gameplay. Not a cinematic teaser, not a logo, not an announcement of an announcement. I'm looking at you, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. I mean, there's certain trends that are just so annoying, and it was refreshing to see this game just come out of nowhere. Now, with all that out of the way, it's time to get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you could win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I will be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 code, it's so easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to pay for your games. Those are all the news stories that I want to talk about, you all. We had another 2-video week here, so on Monday, My Cuphead Platinum Trophy run, I showed you that. It's nice to do another trophy challenge, but I'll tell you, the game was tough, but making that video was tougher. That was a hassle and a half putting that out, but go check it out. And then on Wednesday, I showed you all the new PS Vita I just bought alongside a few games. We'll always do some Vita coverage here on this channel. You know that. This is the best PlayStation channel on YouTube. We will always cover all the platforms and give them all their fair attention every so often. We'll have I don't know, maybe we'll do another 2 videos, I'm not sure. You know the drill. If there's a Monday upload, there'll be one Wednesday. If not, you'll see a Tuesday upload. But that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Rob Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.